Hey everybody, my name is ArinTheWolf, and welcome to my review of the Resident Evil 3 Remake, as well as a mini review of Resident Evil Resistance for the PS4. Now, right off the bat, I'd just like to say that I love the Resident Evil series. I started the series with the RE1 remake a couple years ago. I found it to be quite boring at first, but once I actually gave it a chance, it started to grow on me. Soon enough, I finished it both as Jill and Chris, and eventually played games like Resident Evil 2, 4, 7, and the remake of 2. With that said, I loved the Resident Evil 2 remake, so naturally I was pretty excited when the remake for Resident Evil 3 was revealed. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was one of the few Resident Evil games I hadn't played yet, even after playing the remake. So I went about it as blind as one can get, and what's the verdict? I think it's pretty good. Is it as good as Resi 2's remake? No, not by a long shot, but I still liked it regardless. The synopsis of Resident Evil 3 is that our protagonist, Jill Valentine, is staying in Raccoon City from RE2, who's on a mission after finding out that the medical company known as Umbrella had been making bioorganic weapons of mass destruction to expose their crimes to the world. However, just 3 days before Jill is supposed to leave town, a masked tyrant breaks into Jill's apartment and completely ignores the practice of social distancing, trying to kill her. Jill eventually meets up with a guy named Carlos, who is part of Umbrella's biohazard cleanup crew to hopefully find a way to cure the city of the infection, while avoiding the attacks of the tyrant known as the Nemesis. Now, even though that Resi 3 takes place in Raccoon City from Resi 2, it actually takes place 1 day before and 1 day after the events of 2. So I guess because of that, you could call this game Resident Evil the pre-sequel. As far as the story itself is concerned, I do think that it works pretty decently. There's always stakes to overcome because of everything that's going on, and I genuinely liked Jill's character in this game. Also, am I the only one who finds this portrayal of Jill kinda cute? No? Just me? Okay. I also liked a lot of the other characters as well. Carlos is such a charming soldier, and Nemesis as a concept is awesome. But there was one character that really didn't work for me, and it's going to involve some spoilers, so click here if you don't want to be spoiled. Okay, moving on. So, I'm going to be real with you guys. I don't like Nikolai. I really don't. The last 2 games had some great villains. Albert Wesker was both over the top and intimidating. William Birkin was a great example of a tragic villain, as he's not really a villain, the monster inside of him was. Nikolai, on the other hand, is a bland, boring mess. His whole character can be summed up in the Russian jerk face who likes money and will cause an entire city to get nuked just because he keeps the antidote for himself to make bank. Every time this guy came on screen, I just let out a big groan because he's honestly one of the most insufferable villains I've seen in a while. Granted, Wesker and Birkin weren't exactly fleshed out, but at least they were intimidating for different reasons. This guy, on the other hand, is just an obstacle for the main characters, and that's it. Not to mention, he killed Todd Haberkorn.
No, wait, please!
I do not appreciate that. Anyway, how exactly does the game itself play? Long story short, it plays really dang well. It takes the third-person survival horror game mechanics established in Resident Evil 2 Remake and brings them into this game. The controls are tight and precise, making shooting zombies in the head a fun thing to do. The item management is also back again in full force, and it's just as good as ever. Because of your limited pocket space, you have to think very carefully about what you want to bring with you, pick up, leave behind, or put inside an item box, since you'll never know what you'll need for later on. Graphically speaking, this game looks fantastic. Capcom's RE engine has consistently made their games over the last 3 years look almost photorealistic, with games like Resident Evil 7, 2, and even Devil May Cry 5. So because of that, the blood and gore you find when it comes to the zombies looks disgustingly realistic, but in a good way. Granted, Resi 7 and 2 Remake are way more gory than this game is, but it still looks fantastic regardless. However, as good as this game is, there are 2 reasons I don't enjoy it as much as Resident Evil Remake, 2, 4, or even 7. The first reason is that this game is really dang short. I beat it my first time in just barely 5 hours, which is longer than the original games are to be fair, but for $60 is honestly a little too much money for this game's length. Granted, it's fun to replay the game for things like alternate costumes and speedrunning, not to mention the multiplayer game that comes with it, but still doesn't compare to the remake of Resi 2. That game had 2 campaigns you needed to play through to see the true ending, as well as several mini campaigns you could play for bonus content, making that game have dozens of hours of content to play for the same price. RE3, on the other hand, only has 1 campaign that, like I said, takes just about 5 to 6 hours to finish, and that's it. That's pretty underwhelming, honestly. The second reason is Nemesis. Now, as someone who thought Mr. X in the last remake was terrifying to deal with, I naturally thought that Nemesis was going to be a nastier version of that. But, as it turns out, that's not the case at all. Nemesis appearances are almost exclusively scripted events, and not someone you could bump into at any point. That's a real shame, because I wasn't really scared of Nemesis at all, even with his flamethrower and rocket launcher. The reason Mr. X was so terrifying is because he was always hunting for you in the police station. He could show up anywhere at any time, and if you weren't careful, he could come out of the hallway and mess you up. Nemesis is once again just an obstacle for Jill to overcome, and that really sucks because his design and his boss fights are awesome. I just wish he was more of a threat than he actually was. In short, the Resident Evil 3 remake, while still really good, fails to match the quality or amount of content as its predecessors. Heck, Resident Evil 4 has more content in it for just $20 than this game has for $60, which is honestly kind of embarrassing. Don't get me wrong though, I enjoyed myself with this game, and I highly recommend you play it. I'd honestly just wait for a price drop before picking this game up. Maybe $40 sounds like a good price? With that said, I'm going to give the Resident Evil 3 remake 3.5 stars out of 5. But we're still not done yet. We have Resident Evil Resistance to look at real quick. Resident Evil Resistance is a game of cat and mouse where 4 players are the survivors and the 5th player is the mastermind, who spawns monsters to stop the survivors from escaping. If you've ever played Dead by Daylight before, it plays pretty much like that, except the survivors can actually defend themselves with guns and melee weapons, and can use healing items. As far as the roster of survivors are concerned, with the exception of Jill, they're all pretty much just generic horror tropes you've seen a million times. The list of masterminds, however, is actually quite interesting, with being able to play as Annette Birkin from Resi 2, as well as a relative of Wesker, Alex Wesker. Playing as the survivors, despite the generic characters, can get pretty fun and intense under the right circumstances. Playing as the mastermind is impossible. I'm serious, man. I could not for the life of me get a game as the mastermind. Granted, my internet really isn't that great, but I could at least get and play games as the killers in Dead by Daylight before I stopped playing. Apparently, no one else can really get mastermind games either, which is a big issue since that's literally half the game. To be honest with you, I didn't really care too much for this mode. It was just kind of a bonus game packed with RE3 to try and justify the $60 price tag. If you want a rating, I'd give it 2 stars. Great concept, lackluster execution. And with that said, I'm ArinTheWolf, and I hope you all stay safe out there. Stay strong, and live life.